I'm excited today to have a special guest, Trey Williams. Trey is a nationally recognized expert in entrepreneurship and business strategy. Now, there's a significant decline in entrepreneurship in America that inspired his upcoming book called Boss Brain. And his mission is to rescue 1 million entrepreneurs from traditional employment. So, in the new book, Trey reveals a scientifically proven system that unlocks readers' true potential and unleashes their entrepreneurial instincts so they can leave traditional employment forever and embrace what he calls the real American dream. Trey, welcome to the Go for Launch podcast.
I'm very excited to be here, Brandon. Thank you so much for having me.
Definitely. Me too, man. A couple Southern guys. We'll get the accents going thick today. So, of course, I got to ask you, where are you in the world today? Hopefully somewhere sunny.
I am in St. Augustine, Florida. So
Nice.
I am somewhere sunny. It's very nice down here. A beautiful spring day.
Excellent. We're recording on March 26, 2021. This will come out in April. So good times in the South, man. Except for we've had some bad weather, and unfortunately, some people today, we're suffering some tornadoes and stuff like that. But we'll get past all that. But Trey, man, your new book offers some fascinating insights into a couple of parallel tracks. So I want to start going down those. And one I would say is you talk a lot about the evolution of our brain. Okay. Obviously it's called Boss Brain, and you're going to tell us about that, but perhaps even brains plural, because you kind of talk about all of us humans having sort of competing brains going on. So that'll be interesting. And then the second track, I think, is the connection between our brains and how we've either embraced or moved away from entrepreneurship, starting businesses in different periods of history. So why don't you start by kind of giving us a theory of how does our brain or our brains work, and how have our perceptions been impacted on the choices we make, whether we go to work for somebody or we decide to try to work for ourselves as entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, Brandon. You really teed that up nicely. I'll give you a metaphor just to frame this in context. If you condensed all of human history into 60 seconds, this mantra that you're supposed to go to school, go to college, get a job, work for 40 years, get a gold watch, and retire, has existed for less than half a second out of that 60 seconds. So really, for all of human history, our brains have evolved in a world that we no longer live in. And we really struggle as a result of dealing with the day-to-day of modern society, and we're ill-equipped for it from an evolutionary and psychological standpoint. So I talk a little about the duality here that you mentioned, and it was very important for the rise of humanity for someone to be optimistic and to dream of sailing beyond the shores that they could see and find new lands and explore new areas and build a legacy there. But it was also very important for someone to say, hey, that guy's crazy. I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to continue to fish and catch whatever food and grow whatever food I need. And I'm not going to risk my life by going and doing it. And Mother Nature hardwired us with this sort of yin and yang, this kind of fire and ice. And that was extremely important. Otherwise, we might all have never explored, or we might all have explored and sunk a ship and died, right? So we needed those two things. Unfortunately, what's happened in America particularly is this base of Maslow's hierarchy is largely solved. If you're American, you live in relative safety compared to the rest of the world. There's a grocery store right up the street. There's a lot of predictable adequacy, as I call in the book. And that level of adequacy has really caused our inherent desire for predictability to smother that optimism that we were wired with. And ever since the mid-1940s, entrepreneurship has been on the decline in America. And there's almost a 1-to-1 ratio with the rise of the middle class and the decline of American entrepreneurship.
Interesting. We're going to get to some of those cool stats that you share there. But a second ago, Trey, you mentioned that kind of classic American dream, which is, like you said, go to school for 12 years, then go maybe another 4 to 8 plus, get an advanced degree, get a job, work your ass off for the man or woman or whatever for a long time, get the pay, steady paycheck, benefits, hopefully good retirement, 401k, et cetera. But we know that that dream is not terribly realistic or even attainable at this point anymore, is it?
Well, that idea really of setting yourself up for predictable adequacy is just in complete conflict with our wiring. So the word entrepreneur itself stems from an old Sanskrit word that meant inner calling.
Hmm.
It means you had this drive, this inner calling to achieve all that was within your power. In fact, the term the American dream was coined in a book called The Epic of America by James Truslow Adams in 1931. And in it, he stated that it was the opportunity and ability for every person to achieve all that is within their power.
Hmm.
Well, since then, the American dream as a term has kind of been bastardized, quite honestly. They've turned it into home ownership. This idea that, oh, owning your own home is the American dream. But in many ways, Brandon, that's the opposite, because you're chaining yourself to this big mortgage. You, as a result, feel obligated to find the most predictable option that is going to allow you to service that debt. And you end up in this cycle that keeps you in traditional employment and never allows you to fulfill that inner calling of entrepreneurship that you feel in your heart. And the problem here is 70% of Americans have indicated that they would prefer to be self-employed.
70%. Okay.
70%. And to put that into perspective, that's 100 million people.
Okay. But
Less
out of
than
that,
7%. Less than 7% is. So there's a tenfold difference between those who are thinking it and those who are doing it.
yeah, that's the key. That's the crux of the whole deal, man. And we could
It
talk
is.
about this for hours, right? But the fact is that according to you, your hypothesis and your research, so many people have a desire to want to strike out on their own and pursue something that is meaningful to them, but they're held back by all these societal pressures. Not the least of which you mentioned is if you get a house, like many of us do, you get a big
Sure.
mortgage, and you look at the trappings, and it's also the whole classic keeping up with the Joneses. I don't know what
It
they
is.
call it's probably keeping up with those Fords or something in Finland or whatever, but every country probably has that same concept of like
Yep.
you need to rise to a certain level. Here we've called it the middle class for a long time, which basically is is catering, or what do you call it? Cratering, excuse me. I
Yeah.
can't talk today. The middle class is like disappeared for all intents and purposes. But, what I'm real interested in is that stark contrast that you mentioned. Only 7% of people are actually considered entrepreneurs in America. So why is entrepreneurship in America, especially at such an all-time low? What has the peak of it been back, a couple decades ago or whatever?
Yeah. So the short answer to that question is we're becoming victims of our own success.
Mm.
And the peak really was prior to World War II, at the just after World War II, the baby boom, late 1940s. There was a massive amount of entrepreneurship. 30% of immigrants were entrepreneurs. 25% of the nation was an entrepreneur. And that is, 1 in 4 was self-employed. That is a really, really big number,
Okay. One
right?
in
You're
four.
talking about,
Yeah. Big time.
yeah, that's a
25%.
big, big number of people. And since then, with very few exceptions, it has fallen. There have been little peaks here and there along, but the trend overall has been on the decline. In fact, in the late 1990s, during the Clinton administration, the number was still around 13%. Well, it's been cut in half
Mm.
since.
Yeah.
So if
7.
you follow that trajectory, by the mid 2040s, 99% of Americans are going to work for the other 1%.
That's crazy, man, because, I think a lot of us perceive the opposite. Like, oh, there must be tons of entrepreneurs. We see shows like Shark Tank. We read these stories of all the apocryphal people like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who, started in a garage and built this multi-billion
Sure,
dollar business.
sure.
The guys from Google who, just struck gold, or Zuckerberg who, dropped out of Harvard. I mean, just on and on in these lists of people, it's very romanticized. This idea of, hey, become an entrepreneur, become super wealthy, whether it's Richard Branson or whoever, Bill Gates, another example, right? college dropout. Didn't hurt him too much, did it? Right. But the fact is that you're saying even though people have the desire, they don't have the whatever it takes to push past the fear or the unknown or whatever and actually do it. So get into more of that brain hardwiring. What is it, making people stop from acting on that impulse or that deep rooted interest in being their own boss?
Yeah, so we get conflicting messages. In America, when we're kids, we're told we can be anything we want to be, do anything we want to do, right? But you need to make sure you get really great grades in high school so you can get into a university. Then you go to college and they say, you're going to learn how to change the world from here, but it's very important that you choose a major that has stable and predictable employment, right? So you can get that paycheck just in case whatever it is that you're passionate about, it crumbles or implodes in some way. Go after the STEM jobs, which, by the way, Brandon, make up 13% of all the jobs in America. So we get this conflicting information. And then they say, okay, now that you graduated from college, the American blueprint of life is you should get married and buy a house and have kids. And then after you've collected a stable paycheck for a while and saved up some money, then you're going to have money to pursue those things that you're really passionate about. So it's so conflicting and it's so enigmatic. And we're told this from the time we're kids that we can be anything we want to be, except you have to follow this clearly defined path to get there. And all road, you can't reach every destination on one road. So here's some good evidence for that. There's 5,000 colleges in America or so. Out of those 5,000, 240 or so have entrepreneurship and or small business as a major. That's 4% of the colleges. So the message is resoundingly clear. We are grooming you to be an employee. Yes. That's why you're here.
Yeah, so I would say that resonates with my experience. I'm sure yours as well, going through college.
Absolutely.
Nobody ever talked about, hey, you could be your own boss. No one ever said that to me. Not one time for 4 years of college, and even for years after. It's funny, my first business, when I started it, up to the point I never even thought about it. It was a guy that I was working with full time at another place that came to me kind of like Beavis and Butthead. Man, are you sick of working this place, man? We should get out of here and do our own thing. And I'm like, that's crazy talk. We ended up, doing it. But, the point was that, yeah, you're absolutely right, man. What did you say? 4% of the colleges
4%.
teach it. And so again, there's the dichotomy there between, legitimate, educational institutions and something in the media like Shark Tank that glamorizes it, right? Everybody that waltzes down the stage on Shark Tank is like so inspiring. And you're like, man, you're rooting for these people. Even the ones that don't get funded, you're like, man, that sucks for them. But all the entrepreneurs watching that show think, you know what, that's not going to stop those people. They're going to figure out another way, because that's just part of the DNA as well of an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. So Shark Tank is kind of the anomaly among major media. The vast majority of media paints entrepreneurship as this incredibly risky, dumb thing that you shouldn't be doing, from Hell's Kitchen to Bar Rescue to, all the nightmare shows where they're telling you how terrible this is and how you're going to fail. And then some iconic billionaire is supposed to swoop in and tell you how dumb you are and all the things you're doing wrong. And Brandon, I hate this narrative because it's wrong. And here's why it's wrong. So 65% of all jobs created in America every single year are created by companies with less than 100 employees.
65%.
So anybody who thinks that small businesses make small contributions is not educated about the contributions they're making to GDP.
Yeah, the other part of that, though, that I've seen, unfortunately, over the years, Trey, is like the chambers of commerce in most of the big cities, like even in Charlotte, where I am, they favor the big companies, man, because they're the ones that stroke the checks and all that. So even though the majority, it's ironic, even though most of their membership in these chambers is the small business, less than 100, it's the big power companies, the energy companies, whatever, that get the attention and the headlines and all.
And I'm glad you're bringing this up. So I actually work closely with EDCs, Economic Development Commissions, and chambers of commerce. It's one of my primary clients in life these days. And the reason is I'm sounding this alarm for them so they can understand. Yes, would it be fantastic to have the new Amazon fulfillment center in your neighborhood where there's 2,000 jobs brought there instantly? Of course, that's a good thing. I'm not trying to vilify large companies.
Sure.
All I'm saying is that much like with our DNA and our hardwired instincts, those efforts need to be balanced with nurturing startups and nurturing small business. Because when those property tax deferments run out, or when the skilled labor force runs out, or when a better deal is offered somewhere else to that major employer and they decide to uproot and go somewhere else, what recourse do you have?
Yeah, that's right. You don't want to be wholly dependent on these giant
Absolutely.
companies that
Absolutely.
can take at the whim, like you said, or based on economics. If hey, Amazon starts getting their teeth kicked in more by Walmart, or Google decides to join forces with Apple or something crazy, and they go,
Sure.
we're not having that anymore, Amazon. Boom, all of a sudden game on. But the other I want to do kind of balance the conversation though, as we're going through it though. What about, because you said so few people are entrepreneurs, that means the vast majority of people, for many different reasons, work for the paycheck and the benefits and et cetera. Again, I think you said early on that most people, including those that work for other people, inherently have a desire to do something else. But does that mean that most people work into their 60s or beyond before they finally say, gosh, maybe now I can try something on my own. Maybe now I can be an artist or whatever my passion was. And boy, I should have done this 2 decades ago, but now I'll do it now.
Yeah. So the entirety of my work is centered around deconstructing these mental and physical barriers that you in society, or you have let society build around you, and really unleashing these instincts that you were born with, that we're all born with. And here's how I know we were born with them. You're alive.
Hmm.
It tells me that you come from a long line of people who figured it the hell out, right? Who
Yeah.
made it happen, because these low-hanging fruit opportunities to get stable jobs and paychecks didn't exist 100 years ago. So that means your great-great-grandfather and grandmother had figured it out over time, and their ancestors had figured it out, which is why we're imbued with this DNA that makes us want this. It's literally bred into us, but now we have these opportunities that bring predictable adequacy, as I call it in the book. And here's why we end up choosing that and realizing it too late. So everyone paints the youth as being overly naive or overly optimistic. If you look on a television show or anything, they're going to say, "Oh, well, they're young and they're naive." Well, if you apply optimism, which is a key component in the instincts to be an entrepreneur, to this, your optimism flows throughout your life. And the point in your life where you're least optimistic is in your mid-20s.
Interesting.
So then this narrative that you're overly optimistic and naive is actually not true. You're least optimistic in your mid-20s. So right at that point, Brandon, where you're making a decision of where to live, where to work, what kind of lifestyle you're going to have, how to take on debt, whether you're going to take on debt, all these massive decisions that have huge consequences down the line, you're making those decisions at a point where you're least optimistic. So of course you choose the most predictable option. Of course you just go and get a job that is under fluorescent light and you're forced to wear a tie that you never wanted to do, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how it flows. Now, ironically enough, the time in your life when you're most optimistic is about 55 years old. So the psychology exposed in the book shows that what you need is a lifetime of understanding how bad times sometimes work for good, and how all things contribute to the story that is your life, that makes you feel optimistic about the future because you've overcome those challenges. And you don't really have that story to tell in your 20s. So it's a painful truth about how we're wired. And it's one that was not problematic until we rose to such a level of adequacy in our country where even the poorest among us are better off than half the world.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's a true statistic. So in America, the poverty line is about $12,000 a year. The median income on the planet is $10,000 a year, which means the poorest people in America make 20% more than half the planet.
Right. Yeah. When you look at countries like, or regions like the Philippines, for example, people there routinely make $1 an hour to $5 an hour or whatever.
Yep.
And, we're talking about minimum wage here, being $7 or whatever. Again, most people here make it even at the lowest levels, but,
Absolutely.
but we're talking about more of that, again, sort of classic entrepreneur type that's going to strike out on his or her own and figure out some new model, a service or a product to make. The reality is, though, I do want to, look at a little bit of the dark side for a minute, not to paint the ugly picture, but, I've been an entrepreneur for many years, and typically what I've seen is there's a lot of enthusiasm in the early days. You jump into something, typically, entrepreneurs are risk takers, number one. So we're willing to take a risk, and we're willing to just get started. Right. And not necessarily have everything laid out like Zuckerberg, man. The guy didn't know, where that was going to end up. He was just creating this cool thing to try to meet chicks in college. Right. Like that was the genesis of Facebook, like matchmaking between college people. And then look at what it became. Look at Jeff Bezos, man, sell books online. Boom. Look at Amazon's, anything and everything. Right. But my point is that there's a lot of, so people see entrepreneurship as this glowing thing and like, man, it's got to be better than the 9-to-5 grind and all that kind of stuff. A lot of times they get into it and realize pretty quickly, holy crap, what the hell have I done? Right. Because I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs that tend to extremes, man, of narcissism, have a lot of disregard for other people, that can lead to things like high divorce rates, alcoholism. I've seen a lot of this in entrepreneurial kindred spirits, right? So, and also one of the worst things I've seen is this moral superiority that a lot of entrepreneurs have. Like, man, I've done it. And all you people now that work for jobs for other people, even, the irony is entrepreneurs have to hire people too. So do you want to hire lambs and sheep, or do you want to hire other people that you can possibly help out and groom them to be entrepreneurs? You know what I mean? So can you just talk a little bit about some of the possible negative sides of entrepreneurship that you need to caution people about as
Of
they're
course.
considering it? Because, you hear the scary stats. The words one I hate is, most businesses fail within 5 years. So I think people hear some dumb crap like that and they go, well, I probably shouldn't try.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of things about that. Number one, the people that you might be describing there with that moral superiority, I don't know that they're necessarily pulled into entrepreneurship from an inner calling based on the traditional model of it. It sounds to me like they may have been fired from every job because of their moral superiority, and they were pushed into entrepreneurship because nobody would hire them, right? Because they're bigger than that, right? Yeah. So what I'm talking about are the people who feel that pull, that gravity that pulls them from their place, not pushes them because of their inability to get a job. But it's important to note that among entrepreneurs at the same compensation level as traditionally employed, they note significantly higher life satisfaction, significantly higher levels of contributions to society, both in volunteering their time to nonprofits, giving $1,200 more a year on average to charities, voting more often, serving on boards and serving for community organizations more often. Entrepreneurs make a significant positive contribution to society, and that creates a ripple effect throughout their community. And because their kids are 7 to 8 times more likely to be entrepreneurs themselves, they also create a ripple effect through time.
Got it. Okay.
So are there negative aspects of entrepreneurship? Yeah, it's hard work. But I would say that those who feel that calling don't find it to be the negative world that some might paint it out to be, so long as they go about it in a way that's commensurate with their own level of risk tolerance, their own level of work ethic. And you have to be thoughtful about how you deconstruct those barriers between you and entrepreneurship. And as long as you do that in a way with a lot of self-awareness, we talk a lot about in the book, then you're walking into this with your eyes open and not naively optimistic, as some might suggest.
Oh, I love that. I think you made some great points. And I think you've made me realize that some of these folks that were the most hardcore, narcissists and the ones that beat down the 9 to 5 crowd are those entrepreneurs that have gotten to that stage where they're unemployable,
Yep,
except by
absolutely.
themselves. And that is
Yep.
totally the case, man. A lot of people,
Mm,
like you said, it's almost like if you make that leap, man, it's hard to go back for a lot of people.
it is.
And because of the freedoms that you get. I mean, again, freedom is a loaded word because there's a bunch of stuff that comes with being an entrepreneur that it makes you chained. you know,
Right, right.
you're chained to sell. You have to sell, you have to deliver, you have to show up, you have to do the work, you have to compete with others. You got to pay the bills, pay the taxes, pay the people. There's a bunch of stuff, right? And the bigger the company gets, the more headaches. But everybody that has ever started a business started at some point. Sam Walton, for crying out loud, like started with one location, right? Walmart. I
Yep.
mean, I think it also helps to remind people of that as well. And I don't know, you're not saying that entrepreneurs have to stay small either. I mean,
No, not at all.
entrepreneur,
In fact, I would argue that there's a bell curve in entrepreneurship, just like in everything else in life. That a small business with static growth, with the same number of employees and the same amount of revenue every year is not hard. It's not difficult. It's very predictable. It gives you predictable adequacy. If your business does $1 million a year, 5 years in a row, it's kind of a job,
mm-hmm.
right? It's
Yeah.
not that hard. And I would argue that if your business is wildly successful, doing $50 million a year in revenue, it's also not that hard because you've been able to hire some smart people and put them around you and trust in those folks that you brought on board. If you're feeling pain, it means you're growing. It means you're evolving.
Mm.
And that pain is a good thing because it allows you to sort out the weaknesses to get to the other side of that bell curve. So any entrepreneur who's feeling that pain should revel in the fact that it means demand is up, right? Or that they're refining what their culture is, or they figured out the hiring model so they get the best employees because that one was terrible and it was painful, but now you know better and now you can learn from that. So
Yeah.
I'd say that pain is a good thing. It's the weakness in your business leaving so that in the future you don't make those mistakes again.
Nice. Well, we've been talking about the boss brain, sort of that part of your brain that says, I want to be the boss, man. I want to be in charge. And the fighting against the other one going, what are you, nuts? Like, don't do that. Stay safe, stay stable. But, I think people can get a lot out of this book. Trey, where can they find this and get, on the list so that when the book comes out, they can grab their copy right away?
Yes, so the pre-purchase campaign actually launches on April 2nd at noon and runs for about 30 days. And you can go to getbossbrain.com and pre-order the book or multiple copies if you want to give some to your entrepreneurial friends and family. But you can always go to traywilliams.com, TRAWilliams.com, and there'll be a link to pre-purchase the book there that should ship later this year. And you'll also be able to connect with me online. I've always enjoyed talking with entrepreneurs virtually and connecting with like-minded people. And it's not your boss brain doesn't mean you want to be someone else's boss. It just means you have the inner calling to be your own boss. And America really still has that spirit. We've just got to reverse this downward trend and get back to where we once were.
That's great. I think the book is an excellent read for anybody who's either thinking about doing it themselves, or if they're not, maybe it is for them to educate as a parent, for example, and tell their kids, again, because we talked about how educational institutions kind of shy away from teaching this for whatever reason. Maybe it's because it's just not that many people in academia that have actually struck out and done their own thing, right? But I think as parents, as um, mentors to people coming up, youth coming behind us, we owe it to them to point out that there are different paths that they can consider. And especially, like you said, I found that fascinating when you said we're least optimistic in our 20s, because I'm looking back going, man, I was sure as hell probably more optimistic when I was 22 or whatever. Like you're saying, it's the flip script. But I'd like to go grab some 20-year-olds and go, what the hell is wrong with you, man? You've got so much time and runway ahead of you. You should throw your backpack on and get the hell out of here and see the world and do funny, crazy crap Do it
I
now.
couldn't agree more with
Man,
that.
fail.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man, like fail in your 20s. I mean, or don't start out with the failure as the option, but like think about it as experimentation, man. Do it. Like, and it's so funny because I think everybody at every age looks, there's the imposter syndrome. So when you're 20, you're like, oh, people think I'm a 20-year-old. Well, did they think that of Mark Zuckerberg? Yeah, but they also thought he was like a wonderkind genius, right? At 18 years old or whatever, versus the guy who's 50 plus. It's in other words, I think what you're subscribed to here in the book is just giving people some serious food for thought. And so I appreciate everything you've put into this, man. And I hope the book is a tremendous success.
I really appreciate that, Brandon. It's been a real pleasure talking with you here. I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Yeah, same here. Well, once the book's out and about and in the wild, man, we might have to grab a round two of this conversation.
Absolutely. Nothing would make me happier.
Thanks again. All right, brother. Let me hit